Thanks to the entire Plant Chicago team. You guys are awesome for being our host this afternoon. Soon, everyone will meet Jonathan Pereira, Plant Chicago's fearless leader and executive director, and we will all soon see why, especially with today's topics. This is the perfect space in which to have this film and conversation today here, but also beyond here. So I'm Anna Garcia Doyle. I'm the executive director of One Earth Collective, which produces the One Earth Film Festival. I want to welcome you guys to this festival screening event, a continuing partnership with the City of Chicago. Angela Tovar, our Chief Sustainability Officer, and her team. She is here today. We're very fortunate to have her voice in the room. Thank you, Angela. We will hear more from her as the events get underway. But I believe I speak for both of us, the One Earth and the city's teams too, when I say that we hope today's event provides us all with rich opportunities for learning and a brave and safe space for important conversations and a way to move from inspiration to action. So I am here, right? You guys know this. I'm here in front of you, together with you, in this in-person live space. But in these times, we have to describe these things. And so I'm also with you, the virtual audience, who is joining us from all over. And so it could be nighttime for some folks who are joining us today. We don't know. But I am in the Plant Chicago space in the back of the arts community. And for virtual audience members, I invite you to please type in the chat. Where are you joining from today? How many people are watching with you? And if you are able, please acknowledge the native land which you occupy. And as you're doing that, we'll let those come in. So virtual audience, type in the chat where you're joining from, how many people are with you, and the native land which you occupy. While those are adding up, and Elise is going to be helping share some of those in a sec, but can you guys shout out here in the room where you came in from today? Anybody? Just shout it out. What neighborhood? Naperville. Great. Thank you. Welcome. Anybody else? Lakeview. Awesome. Who else? Did I hear Pilsen? Edgebrook. Great. Thanks. Sorry? Hyde Park. Awesome. Love it. We're North Center. Love it. Okay. Oak Park. Great. All the communities are here. Love it. Thank you. Who do we have in the virtual check-in, Elise?
We have a couple local attendees as well. Oak Park, Lombard. We have someone tuning in from Tucson, where apparently it's beautiful weather. And we have someone from the UK as well.
Okay. I love it. Okay. Well, everybody, please keep checking in. So I'd like to just officially welcome everybody again and just say that we really could not do this without the support of our sponsors and our partners. So in addition to our co-presenters, the City of Chicago, and our hosts, Plant Chicago, a big thank you to the Chicago Community Trust and to Reaply. And so another quick note, if your circumstances allow, please donate to support the work of Plant Chicago. You can do that at the check-in table, I believe, as well as to One Earth to support our nonprofit year-round screening events, youth programs, and more. And now we have a little pre-recorded bit. Please bear with us, just 3 minutes to share some important notes, contextual notes, before we dive further in today's program. So thanks for your patience with that. And thank you again all for being here in person and virtually.
Welcome to One Earth's Earth Week Mini Film Festival. In continuing partnership with the City of Chicago, the One Earth team, together with Chicago's Chief Sustainability Officer, Angela Tovar, and her team, invite you to join us in turning the tide on our climate crisis. This week, we're joining forces in using the power of film to create a sea change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like racial, social, and economic justice. Here's a brief word from Angela now.
Hello, my name is Angela Tovar, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago. It's an incredible honor to be here with you and to partner with One Earth to bring you another exciting Earth Day Mini Film Festival. We commend the One Earth Collective for curating this incredible lineup of films and for all of the important programming that they lead year-round to foster thought-provoking dialogues on pressing environmental issues through a justice lens. This Earth Week, the City of Chicago will release its updated climate goals through the 2022 Climate Action Plans, to identify new and ambitious targets, and to reaffirm our commitment to climate action and the delivery of equitable co-benefits that our communities need to thrive. We look forward to joining you all for an exciting week of film viewing and discourse, and a continued partnership to move the city toward a more just and equitable climate future. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for your words and for your continuing collaboration. As we celebrate the 52nd anniversary of Earth Day this week, we continue our hybrid fest format, presenting virtual and Chicago area in-person events. And we remain committed to our unique community-based model of raising awareness, engaging in dialogue, and being inspired to act on behalf of our one Earth. A powerful image and call to collective action in light of this year's festival theme, Turn the Tide, are the words of Japanese writer Ryanosuke Satoru. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. As always, our agenda will be to introduce you to folks who will join us in a rich discussion after the film, to watch the film together, to unpack the film's themes with our facilitator and panelists. Please participate using the chat. And finally, to share actions we can all take to be part of the solution. I'd now like to make a few brief acknowledgements. First, as we reframe narratives around justice, environment, and equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we acknowledge the many filmmakers and subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining us this week. Thank you. Second, One Earth Collective is based in Chicago, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and home to many other tribes, including today, peoples from over 100 tribal nations. And yet, there are no federally recognized tribes in Illinois, due in part to colonization, relocation, and genocide. One Earth commits to including films that center Indigenous stories and voices. Beyond acknowledging the native lands we each occupy, we must lift up and support the work of First Nations groups. If you're in the Chicago area, please support the important work of the American Indian Center Chicago, Indigenous Environmental Network, Shy Nations Youth Council, and others. And watch for Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories, an exhibition co-curated by the Field Museum and collaborators from more than 100 tribes, opening next month. A third acknowledgement. Shared agreements can help our conversation remain safe and respectful. When participating today, please put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect, engage your active listening, and use I statements and get comfortable with your own story. A quick note before we meet our facilitator and program participants, please amplify today's voices on social media. The hashtags for the festival are hashtag OEFF 2022 and hashtag Turn the Tide. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
Welcome to Plant Chicago. I'm Jonathan Pereira, the Executive Director of Plant Chicago, and welcome you to our new home at the Firehouse. Plant Chicago's mission is to cultivate local circular economies, and you're here entering our new space, the Firehouse, and our retail space, where we are featuring products from local small businesses that are all working to implement circular economy practices, from eliminating single-use plastic to reuse models to sourcing local. We're partnering with the Urban Canopy to make sure that we can source locally and sustainably grown produce. And we're selling it at a sliding scale and doing link matching to make sure that local growers can earn revenue, and also that low-income families can afford to buy locally and sustainably grown produce. Follow me. I'm surprised, I'm right here the whole time. That was hilarious, great. I'm Jonathan, I'm here to welcome you and tell you to Plant Chicago, but also the important detail for those of you that are here right now, to take out your cellular devices and imagine we've just boarded a plane. You go into your settings and put on airplane mode. Don't just put it on mute, put it on airplane mode. Okay, no, you're shaking your head?
For an airline, please, no, please.
Okay, sorry.
Not kidding, go ahead.
All right, I didn't know I was gonna trigger something with that. Welcome, and I also want to just say thank you to the panelists that are joining us here today and virtually as well. One Earth Film Festival for going through this crazy setup of doing parallel, virtual, and in person. I think that's really great. Angela Tovar, the Chief Sustainability Officer. Welcome again, 2 days in a row. And congratulations on the release of the Climate Action Plan from the city. And Sergio, Rapu, who's here. Nope, that's me. Virtually as well. We're looking forward. Stick around after. There he is. There he is, Sergio. Hey, give me 5. Stick around after the film for for a panel discussion, and then I believe there's like more, for those of you that are virtual, there's more of like the tour of the facility and more about what Plant Chicago does that you can watch after the film. Is that correct? Yeah, cool. That's it. I think, okay. Take it away, Sergio. Thanks. Yeah, nice. You can clap.
Hey, Yoran Korua. Thanks for having me, and thank you for coming today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion after the film, and really looking forward to sharing a little bit of the South Pacific with you today, and also talk about the similarities between what's happening in the South Pacific and also right here in Chicago. Thank you. Enjoy the film.
In 2020, Angela was appointed as the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Chicago by Mary Lori Lightfoot. Angela has committed to centering the City of Chicago's climate and sustainability agenda on equity and mitigating environmental harm in Chicago's most overburdened and underserved communities. Thank you both for joining us. If you wouldn't mind applauding. How are we doing? Can you hear me okay online? We good? We got the A-okay? Sweet. Fantastic. Well, I want to start this. We'll have a few moments for questions from the audience as well as online as well, but I wanted to kick this off just with a few questions for Sergio, who's virtual right now. A lot of times I've heard documentary filmmakers say that there was a film that they thought they were going to make, and then there's the film that actually being made. How close? What film did you think you were going to make when you started?
That's a great question. I thought I was making a film about food security in the South Pacific, and that's why it's called Eating Up Easter. The title came up earlier than when I figured out what the film was. But when we started down that lens of understanding why Rapa Nui is so food insecure, we import probably 80 to 90% of all of our food, as does a lot of the islands in the Pacific, Hawaii included. As we started looking at it at that lens, we realized that like the tangible thing that you see is the trash from that food, from all that packaging, the water bottles, the cardboard boxes, all of that. That's what remains, and that's the most sort of tangible thing. And so we started kind of essentially like zooming out from this idea of food security and realized it was a bigger topic around development and how do we develop properly. What is the proper way of developing on this tiny little speck of land, like out in the middle of the Pacific?
The title struck me as very appropriate because it was literally like the island is being consumed by tourism and development, and literally and figuratively, right? The culture is sort of being consumed and all these materials and resources. So it works. It works for me. Yeah, Angela, when we spoke before you had seen the film, you said you were prepared to be heartbroken. Were you heartbroken?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that the trailer tells, at least previews the story about the consumption and the materialism. And I think that I was heartbroken by that because I think that that is reflective of many places around the world that we're seeing where this is happening. And I think I was going into the film, I thought that that was going to be the only story. But in a way, I'm not, because I also was just so moved, Sergio, by your story and just like this love letter to your culture for your children. That blew me away. I think that that was so powerful, so beautiful. I'm like a little emotional about it today. But I was really moved by that. So I'm not entirely heartbroken because I think that there is just this story of just the beauty of the island and the strength of its people that really shines through. And it is such a powerful film, and I appreciate you sharing this with the world, really. I'm just really grateful to have had time to see this movie today, and I'm sure I speak for many people in the audience as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Sergio.
Oh no, I appreciate that. Thank you for your thoughts around that. I think we've shown this film a lot to different places, and I think audiences are impacted the most when they start thinking about how what's happening on Rapa Nui is also happening, in their own space. And so I'm also kind of curious just to, proceed in the discussion. I don't know if you have questions around this, and really just learn about like how does this connect to Chicago? How does this connect to the world that you guys live in, right?
It's like what, and this is probably, I'm curious if folks are in the chat or something like that too. But Angela, what resonance or what parallels do you see in Chicago?
Yeah, I think that this struck me personally. I grew up in South Chicago, which is on a neighborhood on the southeast side. And I think that what really moved me about the film and the parallel that I saw, I didn't expect it to be personal, but it happens to be. And I think I thought a lot about just the dependence on extractive systems, right? And on the southeast side for a very long time when I was growing up, which was in the 80s and 90s, that was a dependence on the steel industry. And we were a naturally abundant community as well. It's on the lakefront, we're on the Chicago River, but that wasn't always apparent just because of the volume of steel production that was still happening until the 90s in the community. And, and now that globalization happened and the steel production, moved on, there's still just this dependence on industry as the only pathway for job generation. And a lot of people feel very strongly about that. And so you hear, new emerging battles against, the waste industry that's coming into the community, or just different pollution producing industries that are coming into the community, because in a way, much like, tourism on your island, people may not know that there is another economic pathway, right? And they're just, we've just grown to be dependent on that. And the land is used for that purpose, right? And so I think that that's the parallel that I see. And I also worked a long time in the South Bronx, and did a lot of EJ work there for over a decade. And it was a very similar experience where the entire neighborhood that I worked in, which was Hunts Point in the South Bronx, was completely dependent on the food market. The food distribution center for all of the Eastern Seaboard just happens to be in the South Bronx. So all of the restaurants just receive, import and exports of food that gets shipped everywhere to the entire East Coast. And it's a very truck-dependent industry. There's a lot of waste generation, and it's also in the neighborhood as well. It has a very high concentration of waste transfer stations as well. And very similarly, right, it was very hard to convince people that there is another industry out there, that another economy out there that people can depend on, and that's difficult, especially when you see the public health statistics that are associated with that. When you see people that have high rates of asthma, or lack of fresh food, or other outcomes because of just extraction or lack of natural resources. So I think that those are just two examples of just places that I've seen where I feel it's difficult, right, when you're dependent on one economy that may not be serving people in the way that it should.
And to build off this too, like you were just saying, that the southeast side has historically been very dependent on the steel industry. I think it would be remiss not to bring up the more recent news in Chicago, and for those of you that are joining, and Sergio, you might not be aware, but one of the biggest challenges recently has been a well-known metal recycler that wanted to move to the southeast side that had a history of polluting in another part of Chicago, and the city just officially denied the permit a few weeks ago. But it strikes me as recycling is another industry, and I think many people watching the film would say, why can't we recycle that plastic more? Why can't we build recycling there in Rapa Nui, right? Why can't we recycle more in Chicago? So I'm wondering what each of you think, what is the real role of recycling? Or can we recycle our way out of this? What role does recycling actually play? Where do we recycle? These are big questions. Yeah. Either one of you want to start?
I can start. I would say one of the things that struck me as the most interesting out of any of the other, there were a lot of moments that struck me, but one of them was when the nonprofit consultants came to the music school and they said, you can't do this at scale. It's impossible, right? You're 5,000 people, you can't do this at scale. And I think I reacted so differently to that, or I reacted to that comment and just disagree entirely, because I think we have created these systems where, we think that there's just this one size fits all solution, which is like in Chicago, the blue cart, black cart system, and we know that that's not working, and we haven't been taught what you all are doing here, which is a circular system, right? That focuses on, growth of your own products, of minimizing waste, of learning how to repair things, learning how to reduce consumption. These are all things that we're not taught. We're taught you can consume, and then, there's this magical blue cart that you can put everything in that is recyclable, and we have no idea where that goes. Yes. And that's the end of it, right? And I think, in fact, it's what I heard from the consultants, I feel completely different, because I think we need to challenge ourselves as a city, and I hope that we are moving in that direction where if we don't have the solutions, we need to turn to organizations like this one and activate this network. And I think that, we just spent the last year doing a Chicago waste strategy where we learned from people in the circular economy how we can build that out. And I think that the biggest takeaway, there's a suite of policies that we can pass as the city and are working toward to improve the system. But the other thing that we learned is that we can activate this network of people that are doing the work. And scale doesn't mean that we try to create this huge system ourselves. It means that we're just providing resources to people that are doing it better than we are. And I think that that's the takeaway for me.
Yeah, I shuddered at that comment too a little bit. I had a visceral reaction. It's the how do you scale your business, right? Like one business or one model is going to solve the whole problem in the world, like every problem. So it was a venture capital comment for sure. Sergio, I'm going to pass that recycling question over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you all are more of the experts at it. I'm just kind of a filmmaker, but my perspective on it, based off of what I've seen in my community and really in my own life. So I'm, for those that you don't know, I'm based in Minneapolis currently, and have been here for a while. This is where we're raising our boys, and this is where my wife is from. And we have this like magical blue bin outside that I can just throw things into, and then it disappears. And that is, it's a recycling bin. And this is sort of the difference for me between living here and living in Rapa Nui. In Rapa Nui, the system, the recycling system, what happens to your waste, to the recycling, where the water comes from, those systems are very exposed, and they're out and available because our community is so small, you know people that work in these different places. Here, I've never visited our local recycling facility. One, probably because of my own laziness, but two, because it's not as accessible as it is seeing the recycling center on Rapa Nui. And so I think when in thinking about if recycling works or not, I think for me personally, it's important for me to understand the system that I live within. And living in a big city, that's harder to understand. But I think it's definitely possible. What I do think of a lot is the little triangle of reduce, reuse, recycle, and how it sort of like comes back on itself. But for me, I've started actually realizing maybe it's more of a line than a triangle, where recycling is actually the very last step, and reducing is the very first step. Like what are the products that I can stop using or that I can change, so that throwing something into this magical blue bin is the last resort, the last thing that I do, as opposed to that being the default first. I think for me and for many other people right now, just saying, oh, it's okay, I can recycle it, is a lot easier than saying, oh, I should buy this other product because that paper will break down easier than that plastic bottle will. Anyway, that's just kind of how I think of it, I guess.
And I meant to do this at the beginning, but if there is a word or phrase or something that came to mind in the film, please put it in the chat. Just something that you're either feeling or something that it brought to mind in the chat. I have one more question, then maybe we can go to some questions from the audience and virtual. But I've seen this. I think this is the third time I've seen the film. But every time, I think one of the first things that just strikes me, hits me hard, is how often you hear people say, "Don't speak that language. Speak Rapa Nui or speak Spanish." And it's I love that you had that in multiple people saying some form of that, speak Rapa Nui, to you, right? When you were being chastised, right, at the beginning of the film. And then at some point, Mama Piru gets chastised for not speaking Spanish, right? So I'm curious, and multiple people have mentioned this to me about cultural identity, and I'm thinking, because it's so there, it's so visceral, that there's this clash of cultures, right? How can cultural identity be used as a tool to combat, to become more sustainable, or to fight, climate change? Is like, what is the role that cultural identity can play there?
Yeah, I also felt very personal about that question, or just about that experience in the film as well. And I think just going back to South Chicago was a one of the largest Mexican American community for a very long time in the city of Chicago. My mother's family has been here. I'm third generation Mexican American, and first generation on my dad's side. But people have been here for decades, Mexican people, and the early immigrants that came from Mexico to Chicago, it was assimilate, and Mexicans at that time were not able to preserve the same cultural heritage that you see in Pilsen or Little Village, even though it's an older community, because there was that cultural clash, and it erased their history. Mm-hmm. And I know that in losing that, we lost a lot of the cultural practices that are so common in Mexican culture. And it reminds me of, this morning I was with our parks commissioner, who is also a Latina, and we were talking about, and she had just gone to Mexico City, mm-hmm. and we were talking about, there's a new farm in Little Village in La Villita Park, and she was like, why aren't we doing more of that, right? And it's like, well, we've had these systems historically where we've erased all of these cultural practices that are so supportive and just holistic and part of really, just our everyday way of life, right? And they've just been erased. And that's not, and we can bring back, in celebrating our culture, we can bring back, we're so tied to the environment, right? In Latinx culture and in other cultures too. But for some reason, as Americans, we've just, it has been our cultural practice to let go of those kinds of things, right? And we need to think about honoring that history and bringing back those cultural practices from other places that are so important to us. We don't have to leave them behind. Those need to be celebrated. And I think that food growing is a part of that. It's so important to so many cultures around the world. And farming is so important to so many cultures around the world. And recycling is so important to so many cultures around the world. I was laughing yesterday at this article, this Latinx media article that was joking about how Latinx people have been recycling, because we use containers over and over again, right? But that's a cultural practice that we're taught not to do that anymore when you become Americanized, right? You're not supposed to. It's seen as poor or a poor practice, and we should push back on that. Yeah. And I think that there's just so much we can learn from other cultures about how to reuse things, about how to grow things, about how to be one with nature. And I think that was the other takeaway, just how beautiful and tied to nature your culture is, Sergio. I just thought that really came through, and it was really great to see people in your community that were fighting to hold on to that.
Anything you'd add, Sergio?
No, I mean, this is, I think this is a really great and interesting discussion because I think it applies in different ways. In Rapa Nui, culturally, there is mainly only one culture, and so I remember speaking to Ana Maria early on about what works on Rapa Nui, and she essentially said, we need to pilot all types of programs here, and then figure out which one works and how to adapt it to the culture and the society in order for it to work. Because as you're saying, Angela, I think culturally the practices of reusing are super ingrained in my community and a lot of Pacific communities because there weren't a lot of resources, and so I think that's easily understandable. But now as we kind of move into this modern world, understanding why it's important to separate recyclables if you are going to recycle it is sort of a new mind shift, especially for younger communities. So I think it's always kind of like an evolving practice, and especially in Rapa Nui, we're trying to import technologies to help in that, but it's not necessarily plug and play. You have to figure out how does life work and how can this plug in or not. It's in the end, it's not. I think leaning back on cultural identity is the first and best way to start, especially if you're in a huge metro area with pockets of community. What works for those different communities in order to push to sort of some of the same resolutions. I think it's. Ultimately, it's unclear what that impact will be, but I know it will be more positive than it has been. In the making of the film, I think we make it pretty clear that it's difficult to have, at that time, it was difficult to have a Rapa Nui voice within sort of the Chilean government on the federal level, on the mainland, so to speak. But this new process of rewriting the Constitution to include indigenous voices, not only from the Rapa Nui, but all those others that are on the Chilean continent, is a bit mind-blowing. I mean, imagine if the U.S. did the same. If the U.S. decided to rewrite the Constitution and in doing so invited all of the native communities within the boundaries of this country to have a say. I think in the end, it will be positive in some way for Rapa Nui. The second question I think was around Hawaii. Hawaii is an interesting case to look at in comparison to Rapa Nui because Hawaii is a much bigger economy. There's about 1 million people that live there compared to our 10,000 people. But our dependence on tourism is roughly the same, and also on imports, imported goods and foods. Honestly, I think Hawaii has a better chance of reducing their dependence on tourism than Rapa Nui does, because there's a lot of other infrastructures in Hawaii. There's a tech industry there. There's a food industry there. There's different industries that in some ways have kind of been stifled or ignored a little bit so that tourism could flourish. And thanks to the pandemic and in many ways, both Hawaii and Rapa Nui have seen what happens, right, when there is sort of global disruption in that economy. And so Hawaii is making strides in many ways, not necessarily, I would say, to heavily reduce their tourism, but to think about tourism in a different way, that it's more about an exchange between cultures and less about a service to those who come. I think, what is kind of being talked about there is how can we expect tourists to behave in a different way when they come here. And I think in that sense, I think that there's a lot that Rapa Nui can also take from that experience in Rapa Nui. And I hope that we do. I think it, like many of these things, it's easy to copy somebody else once we see that pilot project taking off. So I'm really hopeful. I'm really hopeful for those changes.
Are there any questions from the online audience?
Yes, so we first of all had an attendee expressing thanks for sharing this beautiful movie. One question, I think this would be for Sergio. Sergio, you shared an update on what's happened since filming wrapped up in 2015, but could you also share an update on how the music school is doing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The music school, like so many other things, has had to adapt also because of COVID. A lot of their funding came from institutional or government entities. And a lot of that dried up when, COVID came into play in the pandemic. So as they do, amazingly enough, they adapted. So if you remember, the school sits on a massive piece of land all around it. And today, all of that land has been turned into agricultural fields. And they have been planting both sort of traditional foods like sweet potato and banana, but also I would say less traditional, like cucumbers and tomatoes and things like that. And they've been able to actually serve the community to raise funds a little bit for the school, but also just provide nutritional, food for the school, for the school and for the community. I think they continue to be this kind of, center point for the island. They're continuing to do their music classes. They had that needed to sort of slow down a little bit because of funding, but now they've adapted a bit, and their efforts are not only in just doing music and arts education, but also around food security and growing to feed the community.
We maybe have time for one more question. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to know from Sergio,
sorry.
what effect does the rising sea levels have on the island? How drastic is it?
Oh man, rising sea levels. It's impacting all islands, obviously. In Rapa Nui specifically, what we are seeing is not so much a rise in sea levels, but a more severe storms. More severe storms, especially during the wintertime. This year, some storms brought a lot of ocean water up inland farther than we've ever seen. And what that's actually causing is a lot of erosion around where our ceremonial sites, where all the statues stand. They're called ahus. They're all along the coasts. And so the New York, there's an article in the New York Times a little bit ago about this. But with severe storms and rising sea level, it's basically starting to eat away at the moai at the structures that are along the coasts. So this is something that we're needing to adapt by building seawalls or other structures to stop that from happening.
Well, I think we're at time for this. I want to thank Sergio and Angela for joining us today. It was a beautiful film, and thank you for your generosity and your time. And all of you for coming here. Yes, please applause. That'd be great. As I understand the virtual audience, I think there's more to be able to see online. For those of you that are here, please feel free to stick around, finish the popcorn, if there's any lemonade yet left. And if you would like to wander upstairs and take a look, there are bees upstairs, inside. And if anybody would like to look around the corner at the shared use indoor farm, find someone with a Plant Chicago shirt or myself, and we can let you pop your head in there. So thank you all for coming.